Right, so The Way of Kings, Brandon Sandersons' Magnum Opus, like the first book in his Magnum Opus anyway, the Stormlight Archive. I've just finished it. I finished it last night, basically up until 1 o'clock in the morning, finishing it. And I really liked it, man. I mean, what were you expecting me to say? I glazed Mistborn. This is... Oh, sorry. Need to be... What did you expect me to say? I glazed Mistborn. I absolutely loved the Mistborn trilogy. I think this falls into the same trappings as Mistborn, maybe even more so, because it is a considerably longer, thicker, almost double the page count book. 1,100 and how many? You think I would have, knew this off the top of my head. 1,133 pages. And I mean, yeah, about 2 months took me to finish it. I should get through Words of Radiance a little bit quicker. However, we do have a couple of things. I've got a couple of things that I wanna devote time to before getting into Words of Radiance. First of all, Thunderbolt's tomorrow. I want to get a video done on that. And then we've got Free Comic Book Day. I'm going to do a video on the books that I get on Free Comic Book Day. And also, there's going to be a lot of catching up on runs after that I'm going to have to do. So that is going to be taking precedent before we start Words of Radiance. However, I'm very excited to get into that book, especially where this book leads off, or finishes off, which I'm not going to spoil for anyone who does want to get into the Stormlight Archive. I'm going to try and keep this video spoiler light, if not spoiler free. Mainly because it's a big, thick book. I'm not going to be able to touch on everything that happens. Essentially, I'll just talk about the main characters, likes, dislikes, the usual kind of review stuff. So, brief overview on what the book is about. The book kind of revolves around three main points of view. Essentially, there are three main characters. There aren't necessarily three POV characters. There's more, and there's the interludes, which I'm not really going to touch on because few of them have much significance in this book. Much if at all. However, one of them does lead to a reveal of who our big, series-wide villain will be. And this book does something really interesting that I haven't seen happen a lot. Maybe I saw it in The Witcher, with the first Witcher book not really having a primary antagonist, or not really having the characters face the primary antagonist yet, just kind of allude to who they are there at that time. With this, there is very little even inclination to who is Big Bad until the second to last chapter. We're essentially chapters from the end of the book, and by chapters away, I don't mean long chapters away. We're pages away from the end of the book, essentially. And then we're basically introduced to, right, here is your big bad, here is why they are the big bad. And this guy's gonna be tasked to kill this other guy, one of your main protagonists, essentially. But that's going to happen in the next book. This is all set up for the sequel. And that's what this book does really well, is it does set up and introducing you to this world and to these characters really well. And in 1,133 pages, better damn hope that it introduces this world really well. So we've got our three main protagonist characters, or we've got our three POV characters. We've got Kaladin, who was a spearman or a spearman, and through unfortunate circumstances, through his time as a spearman, he then becomes a slave. Gets put into this group called Bridge 4, who he then kind of takes the reign of and kind of starts leading them as if he were leading an army, and his story is basically about his kind of rise from slave to kind of like the hero of these people, the hero of Bridge 4, basically. And he then, going through his journey, he then starts to learn and develop abilities and powers, which don't really come into fruition until the end of the book. But when they do come into fruition, in typical Brandon Sanderson style that we've known to expect, when it reaches to the final like part of the book, that's when things really start ramping into kind of fifth gear with it. And yeah, when he starts showing off his powers and his abilities, that's when the book kind of really like gears into it and really starts like chugging away to the finish line. We then have our secondary protagonist, someone that probably the person that's given the most to do, probably is of the most importance. Dalinar, who is this like high prince. He's known to people around him as the Blackthorn because of how dangerous on the battlefield he is. Yet he is one of the only high princes that actually fights on the battlefield, and he's a man of honor. He's trying to instill honor into his two sons, Adolin and Adolin and the other one that I forget the name of at this point in time. What? Excuse me for a moment. Renarin? Yeah, Renarin. I might have the Adolin and Renarin. I may have the pronunciation on that completely wrong. Adolin is a warrior who, is having it's kind of brought onto his character that he's a bit of a ladies' man. He's basically got a different girlfriend every other day, which is something that Dalinar kind of looks down on him about. And Renarin is basically unable to fight. He's got like I think it's epilepsy. That it's described basically like epilepsy, where he just has fits every so often. Maybe that's not how epilepsy works, but it's described in that way. And we get the story of Dalinar. He's this big he's the king's uncle, the original king, or the king's dad is killed, and Dalinar isn't there to protect his brother, so he's vowed his life to protect his nephew, who is the new king. And there's a mystery about who is trying to kill King Elokar, who is the new king. And there's things to do with Sadeas, who is kind of this rival character, this old friend of Dalinar's, who's more of like a bitter rival, and is even more of a rival towards the end of the book, which I won't spoil anything about. But basically, Sadeas is a bit of an asshole, to put it lightly. If anything, I would probably say Dalinar is kind of like the Aragorn placement of this book, even though this doesn't kind of feel anything like a Lord of the Rings style thing. It doesn't fit that kind of vibe at all. There isn't like this kind of forging of a fellowship. Dalinar and Kaladin don't actually meet each other until the end of the book, until the big kind of climax. And that's cool in and of itself, as a climax usually is in a Brandon Sanderson book. But the thing about Dalinar is he's getting these visions, and he's being told to unite them all. And no, I'm not going to get onto that yet, because it does kind of lead into spoiler territory. But he's being told to unite these people, or essentially unite the High Princes, which he starts basically from the bottom, and no one wants to help him, and he eventually settles on Sadeas. And that then leads into what it leads into, which I will not spoil. And then we have Shallan, who is probably the least important in this book. I've heard that Words of Radiance is pretty much her book, and it better be, because she gets barely anything in this. She is going over to essentially steal an artifact from Dalinar's niece, and she ends up becoming the ward of Dalinar's niece, and that's essentially her story. There is more to it than that, but everything else around her leads into spoiler territory as well. The big thing that kind of unites the three characters is all three of them are getting visions, and Kaladin is the only one in this who starts experiencing powers. Shallan does experience other worlds and start seeing things, but it's nowhere near as drastic as what happens to Kaladin by the end of this book. If I had any complaints with this, it's the pacing. So going over everything that I really liked first is the characters, the characterizations, dialogue. I feel like Brandon Sanderson is really good at making people feel like people. If that makes sense, he's really good at making his characters feel real and their reactions and their emotions feel real. Maybe less so in Kaladin's point of view. I still feel like a lot of Bridge 1 or Bridge 4, they get enthused over Kaladin, I think, really quickly. And that is, I think, where the pacing kind of falls flat for me a little bit, is maybe with Bridge 4, because you are putting so much time into Dalinar throughout the second third of the book. Essentially is all Dalinar. Book 2, or not book 2, but part 2 has is basically setting up Dalinar, why you should care about Dalinar. And then book 4 is the big climax of basically Dalinar and this big battle, essentially. And that takes time away from this big cast of characters that we've got with Kaladin, and them learning to trust, and then this kind of then learning to revere Kaladin. It feels very quick to me, and that's not me saying that the book should have been double the size, because that would have been impossible to read. However, what I do think it should have been is more tactful with its time. I feel like there's some chapters in this that didn't need to be in it, and maybe they're going to be important later on. Maybe the interludes. There is an interlude in this book where it's just two people talking about soup. Essentially, it's just a bloke kind of learning new recipes for a soup, and it's only a few pages, but it feels like that could have been 3 more pages of development and time for maybe a conversation between Kaladin and Moshe, or Kaladin and Teft, Kaladin and Rock. It could have been more about that, and there is plenty in here, I feel like, of development for these characters. And when characters do start dying at the end, you do feel it and you do care. But I feel like I could have cared more if more time was put onto them. That's my only real gripe. That, and like with most Sanderson books, it takes a long time for characters to start. It takes a long time for things to start happening. And I feel like in a first book, that's fine. Going forward now, like a lot of this book is Kaladin running bridges. A lot of this book is Dalinar having visions. A lot of this book is Shallan studying. Like, up until the last quarter of the book, nothing really happens of consequence, or nothing, and no bigger reveals are kind of shown. Like, Sanderson keeps his cards very close to his chest, and then at the end, and then like you reach page 800, it feels like, and he just goes, "Here's everything. Here's everything that I have to show." And maybe that's a choice. Maybe that's like, right, this is the turning point, and now we're going to get breakneck speed throughout the series. And this was my feeling towards Mistborn as well. I did feel like that first book was a bit slow for my liking, and then the second book kind of went in a bit more of a breakneck speed for an even bigger climax. And then we had Hero of Ages, which was all climax. It was all just kind of the biggest stuff all happening throughout the entire book, essentially. That is not this. And I feel like this book does its purpose of putting you in the world, making you feel for these characters, introducing you to the themes, introducing you to what everything is about, and more importantly, giving you a cast of characters that you care about by the end, or care about by the halfway point even. And I did care about every character in this book by the halfway point. And I feel like that is a indictment on Brandon Sanderson's character work, essentially. I feel like this I feel like the characters in this are more realised, more diverse, and more interesting than maybe Mistborn is. And maybe that's because there's just more time invested into them. But I care about Dalinar. I care about Kaladin. I'm excited to see where their relationship goes in the next book, and I'm more excited even to see Kaladin and Adeline's relationship, as it feels like they're both going, and maybe even Renarin, how they're going to react to Kaladin possibly taking on more of a, or Dalinar possibly taking on more of a paternal role to Kaladin. Now, I don't know whether that's going to be where the next book goes, but I'm excited to see where things go from here, and I'm excited to see Shallan's stuff, because she is being folded more into the fray, and you know, where her story kind of ends up with this is her going off to fight, or not going off to fight, but her going off to the Shattered Plains, where essentially the whole of this book takes place. She's been somewhere else throughout the entirety of this book. She has not met Dalinar, Kaladin, or anyone else apart from Dalinar's niece. But yeah, Jasna. But yeah, The Way of Kings is really good. I highly recommend it. However, do go into it with the expectations of a 1,000 page epic, and do go into it knowing that there is a lot of talk about mental health in this book. There is talk about suicide in this book. It, for the most part, is relatively upbeat, and there were some moments that did make me chuckle. However, there are some moments in this book that are quite dour, depressing, and quite dire. And that is, and I did get that feeling from Mistborn as well. There is a lot of stuff in Mistborn that's quite quite depressing. But yeah, this book, because obviously most of it is from the POV of someone who is essentially in living in slavery, being forced to do bridge runs, or essentially carry a bridge across a desert for like hours on end. The sort of the topics at hand aren't going to be the most light and fluffy. However, there is humor found in it, and it feels like human. It feels human in that way. I have heard a lot of people say that they don't vibe with Brandon Sanderson's style of humor, and his sense of humor isn't the best, or isn't their favourite. I disagree with this book specifically. Maybe it might get a bit more, it might get a bit more abhorrent later on. I feel like it's fine in this one, for the most part. For what this book is, it didn't feel necessarily out of place for there to be funny parts in the book. And those funny parts mainly come from characters feeling awkward, or being put in awkward situations. But yeah, that's it. The Way of Kings, really liked it. I don't know what else to say. I really liked it. I don't give number scores for books, because this isn't really this isn't even necessarily a review of the book. This is just me talking about it, saying I liked it, saying you should go and put it, saying you should basically go and read it as well, and you'll probably like it as well. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.